Sorry about that. Okay.
In a vast wasteland of entertainment where radio has become obsolete, stands an embittered man teetering at the edge of sanity. With help from radio friends, he's about to embark on a global mission that would change the course of history as we know it. Broadcasting live from the secret studios on the banks of the Brandywine River in Delaware is Mitchell K.C. Hill. And up to the Great White North in Vancouver is Alexander Knight.
All right, here we are. It's take two, as they say in the business. We're rolling into version number 25. And what I was saying is that it's really cool because they say that it's very, 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 very important when you do a podcast that you're there every week with like clockwork. And I was just thinking today, maybe Alex would have a car accident, God forbid, or, you know, he got a bad hamburger at the local drive-in. Whatever. Do you eat hamburgers, Alex? Is that something you'll eat?
Yeah, absolutely. I love a
a
good hamburger. I try not to eat too much fast food, but we're not here to talk about food, though, are we, Mitch?
No, not at all. But it just sort of led into that. You know how loose we are. We're loose as a goose, keeping it real. But show 25, here's what we wanted to talk about before we got rolling, is that in order for this to do this simultaneous streaming on all these services, which Alex will tell you who they are, we need to have follow, subscribe, like, etc. And I think we're missing just a few to get into Facebook Live. So whatever you're doing right now, if you haven't already done it, go in there and click that. Do you have to be in Facebook in order to be? I guess you have to.
You have to have
be in Facebook in order to get it to go. So jump into Facebook. You'll see us streaming there. It's confirmed that we're actually working. And hit that follow button, and that'll get us closer and closer to being there. Now, if we're not streaming yet on Facebook, how do they follow us? Isn't that a conundrum?
Yeah, if you want to follow the show, you can search for us by the name of the podcast. So it's The Last Angry DJ on Twitter, or I should say X.com, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all the platforms as well. And of course, thank you for being here. Sorry for the rough start to the live stream today. This is the show where we interview luminaries in the broadcast world and talk to engineers and salespeople, marketing people, independent radio station owners, and of course the technology side of things as well. So today it's just Mitch and I, and we're going to be talking about a variety of different things. And I really love these episodes when it's just the two of us, and that's the feedback that everybody else is giving us. So I'm really glad that we're here.
Yeah, Robert Choji says that I'm out of sync. So can you confirm that
you are out of your video and audio is way off?
Is way off. I hate that when that happens. I look like a bad Japanese movie.
Can you try just turning off? Sorry for the rough start, people. Mitch, can you just try turning off your video and then disable it in Zoom and then turn it back on again?
All right, here it goes. Okay, they're both back now. Am I relatively close?
That's better. Yeah,
it's better, but it's not there.
And just double check your originals. Double check your original sound didn't get reset. Make sure it's
original
on.
Sound is on. I'll turn it off and then turn it on. This is helpful information. Anybody that gets out of sync on Zoom. So
yeah, it looks.
Is it out of sync on Zoom and then going out that way?
Yeah, it's coming in from Zoom where the problem is, but it seems to be better now. So hopefully it'll iron itself out.
Okay, I'll try to talk like I'm.
Oh, now you're just messing with people.
Yeah, I'll be. I used to get with an engineer and he'd be checking. Time for a mic check, and I'd go, "Mic is working," and that would just freak them out. And then if they were trying to get a focus on me or pulling a focus or something, I would slowly ease into the camera.
That's an old Wayne's World joke, I think. That
is
whole
it?
thing where they pull up to the drive-thru and they're like, "I'll have 3 burgers and fries and."
What? But the part of it is that your mouth has to be moving while you're and completely bamboozling. Anyhow, I hope that's entertaining. Show 25. I'm here with my good friend. Oh, wait a minute. Here I am. I'm Mitchell K.C. Hill, former radio disc jockey and personality. I might even be an influencer now. And I've been telling the folks at Arby's when I go in there that I'm an internet influencer, and they all go, "Wow!" But here's the cool thing about that is I know some of the menu items on the secret menu. This is a thing on fast food restaurants. And then we'll get into the show. They all have secret menus. Like if you go to Arby's and order the Meat Mountain for $17, they will give you the biggest Arby's sandwich on this giant bun. It's a real thing. Make sure you ask for the manager because the regular employees have no idea what that is. And like, for example, you can go to, Sonic, and you can order a pickle Dr. Pepper. Believe it or not, pickles and Dr. Pepper, some kind of wild combination, and it really works well. So we're becoming influencers, and maybe we can include Arby's as our one of our sponsors, or at least they're giving me coupons. So I'll say that we're we're an influencer now, et cetera, et cetera. So anyhow, I'm Mitch Hill. My good friend here, Alex, is the tech guy. Alex, tell them what you do to make this show possible, because today you earned your keep.
Which usually this show goes fairly smoothly, but once in a while, technology bites us in the rear end. But I replaced the computer that was running the Zoom client on late Friday night because after a power-related problem, the aging Intel Mac Pro basically wouldn't turn on.
Careful.
So
don't use that word aging. I don't like it.
I'm sorry.
I have one of those, by the way.
It's an aging Intel Mac Pro, and it just wouldn't boot. So it was time to replace it anyway. So I replaced it with an M2 Mac Mini base model, which is running the Zoom client. And it's odd now that suddenly we're having a weird sync issue, and it's still not perfect, Mitch, just so you know. It seems like you could be at least 50 milliseconds off. So I'm not sure what's happened. I'm running the latest Zoom client here. We're going to have this will get better over time too as I transition out of screen scraping. So we are still screen scraping the show basically, and that's getting piped into our switcher over HDMI. So we're going to move towards Mimo Live, which will improve things. I just haven't had time to set it up. Haven't had time.
Yes. And you're making it seem as it's funny when you have a sync or a technical issue. It's always your fault. It's like I haven't done anything. I got the same equipment. I've got the same old mini Mac. I do have a cheese grater Mac behind me over here, but it's not being used for this. I have it super like it's a classic car. I have it souped up. It's got all kinds of crazy stuff in it. But anyhow, we'll work on those things. We'll make sure we get better. And if I'm out of sync, I'm sorry. Maybe somebody's computer is out of sync and it'll somehow match up. Just pretend I'm an old Godzilla movie and it'll all work. We're here to talk about broadcasting and related stuff. Last week, I thought we had a great conversation about music industry, the influences. Let's take that a little bit step further. Next week, we're going to have a guest, so we won't have a chance to have these little off-the-cuff conversations. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, because this is like the number one question I get when they find out I'm a radio disc jockey, and that's the thing I have to say. When I say I'm a disc jockey, they think that I'm a club DJ, that I do weddings. And now the wedding couple, no, I'm a radio disc jockey. And we played records back then. And a lot of times people want to know, how did the records get on the air? How did you decide what songs got played? And if you were a top 40 radio station, essentially you were playing 40 records plus a multitude of oldies. And you had to decide how did they get added on to from week to week. And I can tell you some of that. And Alex, feel free to jump in anytime if you have a question about it. Back in the day, we'll say 70s, 80s, and then we started getting into the 90s. The mechanism for a radio station to add music generally was through trade publications. There wasn't a lot of local research being done. We tried. We would call the record stores and we would, talk to people, and we would have call-out research, et cetera. But for the most part, we looked at the major trades. And the major trades back in those days would have been Gavin, Radio and Records, I'm trying to think, Friday Morning Quarterback, Bobby Poe. There was a bunch of guys, and they all had sheets out. And they would say, here's the sampling of top 40 across the country. And the radio top 40 business is very monkey see, monkey do. We would sort of follow each other. And occasionally we might drop something in there in order to get noticed, for the most part, that was something new, a little bit off the wall. And instantly there would be some type of research that's happened. So if we added a record that was a little off the wall, like I'll use my bad example. I put Debbie Boone's We Light Up Your Life. At the time, she had done no music. And I was sort of encouraged to place it on the station. Nobody else in the world was playing it. And I was the first station, what is WFIL, where I was the music director. And we put it on, and it got immediate response. I'm not sure it was all good, but we got immediate response. And it got played. And as soon as we started playing it, then stations across the country would say, oh, well, if it's good enough for FIL, we'll give it a shot. And then it sort of ends up being on the chart. So the question is, how do all these songs come together and create the top 40, which is pretty much the same from one end of the country to the other? And when I say North America, I'm including Canada. So it was pretty much the same here, maybe a little different in Europe, depending on where you were. And the process was kind of fascinating when you stop to think of it, because radio stations had a very tight relationship with the record companies. It was our job to expose new songs or play songs, and people would hear them. And back then, remember, there was no social media. So people would be exposed to songs by listening to their transistor radio or their table radio or their stereo, whatever. And they would say, hey, that's a pretty cool song there from the group named Focus, that Hocus Pocus. That's a crazy song. How do I get that? And you'd go to the record store and you'd buy it. And initially you could buy maybe the single, and that would be a 45, and that would be the 45 sales, which the basis of many top 40 radio stations was based on. And then once that song sort of settled in, if you had a hit, a lot of times the record company would say, well, you got a hit 45, you need a hit album. So they always followed up with an album for the most part, unless you were a well-established artist like Elton John or somebody like that would already have an album out, and they would probably pick 4 or 5 singles off that would become 45s and end up on the top 40. So the process of getting songs that are out there in the ether and getting them onto that top 40 was one part sheer luck, one part research, one part who's playing it, who else in the country, and they would watch to see what the chart action would be on that song. So if I was sitting as the music director, which I did, trying to decide, okay, we have 3 songs coming out of rotation out of the top 40. How are we going to fill those slots? What are the new songs? So at that point, you can just guess what songs you want to play, or you might look around the country and see what songs are getting activity and make that play. Now, this is the way I did. Doesn't mean everybody did it this way, but I suspected this pretty close to the way things were done in the early days for radio. The other thing that would happen is that every week, and I mean like clockwork, usually Mondays, sometimes Tuesdays, depending on what station you were at, you would have a period of time that you would set aside where you'd sit in the office with your stereo with you, and one at a time, every record company who had a representative would come in and talk to you. And like they would walk in, let's say it was Warner Brothers. They would walk in and they'd have a stack of 45s and they'd say, here's what we'd like you to play. And it's like, I'd say, wait a minute, that's more records than we have on our entire playlist. Their job is to get you to play as many of the songs that the record company has decided that you should be playing. And some of them could be from known artists, and some of them sometimes are from completely unknown artists. Like the first time somebody came in with Hocus Pocus, you know, the yodeling song by Focus. I don't want to try to do it, but just check it out on YouTube. They go, yodeling, anyhow. It sounds like a Ricola commercial. And they would come in with a crazy song. They said, why would I play that? WLS is it's a top 10 song. It's gone from position number 30 to 15 and 10 in 1 week. You know, really need to be watching very carefully. This thing was all sort of self-perpetuated. So the record companies would come in with a bunch of records, and you'd see 5, 10 different promoters from different record companies that were pushing the records that they wanted you to add this week. Getting an ad was a big deal for a record promoter that worked at a record company. And at the radio station, it was like if you listen to the song and you're good at picking hits, you might base that on any number of different categories. But for the most part, there was some kind of an understanding with the record guys. So let's say the record guy comes in, and I'm sitting on one side of the table, and the record promoter's sitting on the other, and he comes in with a stack of records from Warner Brothers, let's say, or it might be CBS, and say, here's our records for this week. And I said, well, there's too many. And they would go, okay. And I'd go, what are your push records? And they dig into their stack and pull out maybe 2 or 3 inches of 45s, and they'd stick them to the side and push all the other records. These are the push records, and there might be 10 or 15 of them. And then I look at them and say, all right, what songs do you need on the air? And he'd reach in and he'd pull another little stack of them. There'd be like maybe 2 or 3. And then I would say, okay, well, where's my justification? Because I don't want to look like a fool adding this record by a group I have no idea who they're called, Focus, where they're yodeling through the whole song. Why should I play that? And then they would go into their spiel. So they were salesmen. They were selling me product.
Mitch, I've never
that I
heard of
should
the
be
term.
playing.
It's probably obvious, but push record. What do you mean by that? Is that like
push,
the record they want you to promote?
Absolutely. In other words, when the record promoters from each record company would get together, maybe they had a phone conference, they would say, okay, well, what are we pushing this week? Because I knew they had a limited number of records that they could get played, and there had to be all kinds of justification for it. Or there just might be a deal that's going, and the deal might be if you get a record added on a major P1 station, there's a thing that they call the spiff. And the record guy that got it added to the station would be paid a sum of money. I don't know what that amount might be. So there were spiffs and things like that were going on, just like in the sales business. It's a regular business. And it skirted very close to the payola issues, which we'll get into in a second. So they would come in. They had a specific criteria in mind. I knew and they knew that there was only room for maybe, if you were lucky, you could walk out of here with one ad to our station. But there were like 10 or 15 record companies, and I can't add 10 or 15 records a week. It was 2 or 3 records maybe, or maybe sometimes 2. So we would go through the whole spiel. They would play the record for me, and I'd sit there and listen to it. And sometimes it was great and inspirational. Sometimes it wasn't. It would be horrible. Like, I don't know why Billy Don't Be a Hero ever got brought in front of me, or for that matter, Debbie Boone and You Light Up My Life. Or Terry Jackson, Seasons in the Sun. I like picking on those because I just think they're horrible recordings. So you would have to decide what you played and what you didn't. So there might be a little politics involved. In some cases, there might be a little money involved.
Probably
a little politics or money.
A lot of politics.
Well, the politics would be maybe you owe the record guy some favor. Maybe he made you down payment for your car. Or he took you out to dinner 8 times to a really, first class. There was never, I shouldn't say never. I can speak for myself. I never took money for play, which was payola.
I was just going to get to that. Should we maybe talk? Because there's probably a whole generation of people that just don't. I mean, most of the people here in the chat probably know what that is. But for anyone watching that's maybe younger or doesn't listen to the radio, what does that mean?
Payola was, first of all, it's illegal. Still is. The FCC grants a license to a radio station to operate in the public trust. And when you're accepting money in return for play, you're breaking that trust and you're breaking laws. You probably heard that a lot of disc jockeys back in the 50s and the 60s had a lot of power and were accepting a lot of money for play for a lot of songs. And when they got caught, I think the FCC was involved, they were either put in jail or fined a huge amount or banned from the airwaves. So the act of accepting money in return for play, there was some type of an agreement made, would be considered payola. There are other things that weren't quite payola, but were typical of what you would do in a sales relationship. Let's say you're selling widgets to a company. In that case, you might be offering money to, hey, buy 20 or 2 gross of my widget, and I'll give you a $50 kickback on it. That's perfectly legal in the sales world, but in broadcasting, not so much. That was payola. It was illegal to accept money in return for records. The area where it gets gray is if the record guy was doing you favors or something special just because they're good guys or they want to get on your good side, You weren't exactly accepting a record to be played for money, but maybe the guy just did you a favor on something, and maybe money wasn't involved.
Yeah.
And that would be the political side of it. Yeah, I really owe you something. Okay, I'll give it a shot for a week. I'll put it on our extended night playlist, and I'll publish it on our P1 listing, and that would be doing them a solid. So that all those shenanigans, and I'll call them that because they have nothing to do with the quality of the record, everything to do with what the record companies wanted you to do as a decision maker at a radio station. And at a very young age, I was faced with this. I was faced with the opportunity to accept money, which I didn't because I was just too naive to take it. There was other things involved, other inducements. I just wouldn't do it. So any of those things were illegal anyhow, so you couldn't do it. And they still are, even to this day. But trade for favors and things like that, kind of in a gray area. You can't really tie it specifically to a specific song or a record. So there was an awful lot of power being wielded by people in positions of influence in radio stations to the record companies. And you had a lot of friends. Like with me, we used to play liar's poker. You know what liar's poker is? When you play with the numbers. You play poker with the numbers on a bill. I got 3 ones, and there better be 3 ones in the group. I was horrible at it. And all of a sudden, when I got music director job, I started winning big in liar's poker until I finally figured out, I know what's happening here. They're just being nice to me and let me win. So, or you might be out playing golf, or it happened a lot of ways. I don't want to make it sound like it was seedy and horrible, but it could have been, and it might have been back in the early days before it got regulated and people got caught. So this whole process of getting stuff on the radio station was very strange because when you think about it, you wouldn't play a record that wasn't already charting somewhere on some big radio station that everybody watched, whether it was LS in Chicago or WCFL in Chicago or KHJ in Los Angeles or NBC, ABC in New York. All of these things would sort of lead to some influence that would affect how the records got added to a radio station. It was a very slow process. It was very strange, I guess. There wasn't a lot of science to it. At that time, we weren't doing scientific research to decide what songs got played. So very clunky, if you want, and it lasted for decades, and that's the way things were done. As things became more modern, the whole payola thing of accepting money in return for play was kind of out in the open. So what some radio stations started doing is that they started saying, as a company, we'll accept advertising from the record company at some kind of a dollar value, and it would be logged into the playback, and the stations would accept playback from the record. The record companies would accept playback in return for some kind of a favor, like giving away a contest, free trip to Disney World, just an example, or something like that. It was a little out in the open. No one person was gaining anything from it. It was well calculated. The IRS and everybody else knew exactly what was going on, and the FCC kind of let it go. And there were a lot of independent record guys that built a business around providing that service, where they would liaise with the record company, with you, and you would say, like, say we were giving away a contest, like I just said, and again, I'll use Disney World as an example because we did a lot of stuff with them, all on the up and up, by the way, and we want to send our crew to MGM Studios to do a radio show. We might call Hollywood Records up, which was associated with Disney, and say, hey, we need 5 plane tickets and hotel rooms, et cetera, et cetera. And they might turn around and say, okay, well, we'll take care of that. And then somewhere down the line, they might say, we got a new record. We'd kind of like to have it played. We kind of did you a solid. It was just one of those unspoken rules, and it was negotiated back and forth, sometimes through a middleman, like I say, an independent would make that all happen. And as far as I know, it was legal as long as it lasted. It's gone now. Those days are gone. But there was a time where there was a relationship.
I just want to get a comment in here from Mark Giuliani saying, then how do some stations trade for radio vans? The dealer leases the station a car for ads.
Well, that's a different story altogether. You have to remember that playing a record for a record company, there's influence associated with people hearing it and buying that record just on the basis of the endorsement of the DJ or the radio station. The thing that Mark is referring to is that you might make a deal with a local advertiser, and because the advertiser, let's say it's a car dealership like you were suggesting, doesn't have the money to buy a big schedule, or the station doesn't have the money to buy the vehicle, they might make a deal with the car dealership for what they call trade. And that would be all above board. You would say the trade value is dollar for dollar or two for $1, and we'll give you $2 of space for every $1 of car value you give us. That's a completely different animal. And yeah, maybe the car dealership got a little publicity out of it. But that whole thing with records and songs, which is very, it's very subjective, was a completely different beast. So trade and payola were two different beasts and animals. So they are separate. They trading is an age-old prospect of getting stuff that you can't go out and pay for. It's been done. It is being done. It's not frowned upon. It's great. And if you have the ability to do trade, sometimes it's, especially if it's a 1-for-1 trade. If it's a 2 or 4-to-1 trade, it's not so good. So I hope that answers your question, Mark. It's a different beast altogether. But the important thing is that all of this must be taken care of and noted. For example, when you're on the radio, you have a log, if you're doing the old-fashioned way, and you would log in. Let's say you just said, hey, I just got the greatest cheeseburger from Gino's Steaks in Philadelphia. You would have to log that as a 10-second CM, which was commercial matter, plug for a product. As long as it was put in the paperwork, everybody got to know. The FCC knew it, the IRS knew it, the radio station knew it, and it was logged appropriately. So if you're doing any of those kind of little side announcements or endorsements, you had to make a note of it in your log. And nowadays it's all computerized. Same thing. If you just do something out of the blue, you had to log it in there and make sure it got in there. So records, trading products and services, something that's always done, and then the regular ad cycles, which were people buy a cycle and they get on the air. So this whole stuff with the record companies, going back to the early days, especially in the 70s and 60s, a little bit into the 80s, that was just the process. And if you were a station that was listed with, say, Radio and Records, which was the big service back then, it was like the big sheet that everybody went to that would determine what were the national charts, who was playing what. They would sample stations across the country. If you became what was called a P1, you were a very influential radio station. We were definitely a P1 at WFIL, other stations. I know I'm getting Alex's attention. He's zoning out on. I'm talking a lot here, Alex. Feel free to jump in. But
no, it's okay. You know what? You're an expert in this area. I'm taking it all in because you have a lot more experience in this area. So I appreciate it.
Well, and I mean, thank you. But it's also for your edification, because I'm explaining to you how the process worked on the radio for songs to be played. A lot of times they didn't get played because they were great songs. They were being played because somebody got some money somewhere or got some favors or was just lucky to be in the right place at the right time. Or it was a song that sort of tapped into the zeitgeist at the time, like Ray Stevens and The Streak. Like, that's not a song that I would consider a great work of art, but at the time, streaking was a big deal. So people would streak and they would hear the Ray Stevens song, "Come on, Ethel!" And they would play it. You got to look it up on the charts. It was a real song back like 71, 72. So that was the way things got played on the radio. It was being played by virtue of that dance that the record companies and the radio stations did with the guys that were selling. So we would go through this whole process every week where the record guys would come in. We'd sit there. We'd talk to them. We would add records. Then we'd print our own chart. And the chart may be done just on the whim of the music director as, I like that song. I'm going to give it 4 bumps on our top 30. and maybe it didn't deserve it, but that was the way things worked. And you would get rewarded in other intangible ways, like I have about 4 or 5 gold records, which means that I was one of the first to play it, and it reached at least 1 million in sales. And the record companies would make a big deal of it, and they would give you that gold record on a plaque, and it would have your name on it and things like this. I'm sure you've seen it. Alex, have you ever seen that where they have a gold record on their wall, and that's because of you were one of the first to get it, or you were associated with that song to get it played? You ever see those things?
I have come across that, and I never really paid much attention to them. Never read what was on the plaque, but yeah.
Yeah, they were actually gold. I mean, they might have been masters at some point. The funny thing is if you take, and I did it one time, if you take the gold record that's in the plaque with the glass on it and everything, if you take it out and clean it up and place it on your turntable and play the record, it's not the song that you won for. It's just some weird random song that they happen to have an extra stamper for. So if you won for an LP, it might be Humpback Whale Sounds playing on it, or some Jewish polka specialty, some crazy. It's still one of the weird things about getting a gold record. I don't think they do that anymore, do they? The RIAA used to release those things. I don't think that they're offering gold records for playback. It's a whole different beast today. So this all went on right into the 90s. Record company reps, there were independent guys that would go out and promote, and those guys would curry the favor of music directors and program directors around the country, for better or for worse. Those independents were very influential people. I remember a guy named Freddie DeCipio, who worked out of Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Was he mobbed up? I don't think so. And I wouldn't say that because Freddie has moved on. But he was a very nice guy, and he did me favors that were just helpful things. He gave me advice when I first became a major market DJ. He curried favor, I guess, in a sense. He was sort of like the godfather of music. He and Tommy Mottola and maybe a couple other guys, they're it. They made the decisions. And the way they were motivated is that they were paid. They were independents, paid by the record companies to get these little spiffs. If they added a record to a radio station playlist, they would get a big chunk of change. Sometimes, here, I've heard this, I don't know for sure, they would split their spiff with somebody at the radio station. But I can't be specific on it. Never happened to me. I wish it had, or I wouldn't be going to McDonald's for lunch every day. But it was just one of the ways that you curry favor. A lot of things that happen in the world of sales were frowned upon in broadcasting, and it was mainly because your license was granted in the public interest by the FCC. You don't really own that station. That's the weird thing about it. You don't own the station. You have the right to use that frequency, and you're licensed to use it in the public's best interest. You're serving the public interest by having that radio station. So a lot of people forget that's not a thing that you might own the building and the equipment and the marketing, et cetera, but the actual frequency is owned by us, the people. So that's that. I'm sure that Mark would jump in here and say, wait a minute. Somebody might pay $1 million for radio stations, and they say, well, I own that station now. Well, you own the building, you own the transmitter and the tower, but the frequency is owned by the public because it's granted by the FCC. So that's kind of how the music stuff worked. It was a very interesting dance that went on. And now, and part of what we talked about last week, Alex, is that now the way the music works, it's not being exposed by or promoted by the radio station. It's being thrown out there in social media, on Spotify and Pandora. I mean, all the things that we talked about last week about how records get exposed and played.
Yeah, I mean, things are very, very different now. I think I don't have any data to back this, but I mean, clearly the majority of people get their new music from streaming services, and that's how they experience it. People love music playlists. This is also something we talked about recently, is that the lost art of it's not really an art, but the thing of sitting down and listening to an entire album, and it seems like that's gone away. But that it's interesting because that cultural shift has changed also the way how artists, a lot of independent artists, how they make music and how they advertise it. So a lot of people now focus on singles. It's all about the single again. Or they do EPs. They don't do full length albums anymore. You see that a lot on services like Bandcamp, which actually is a great service, by the way, to support independent artists because you can sell merchandise there as well. And
EPs, extended play.
Yeah, exactly.
It might be a
So
special mix or an
it's not that
extended length
it's not that
version.
artists don't make albums anymore, but I think a lot of people skip a lot of songs or curate their own playlists. Let's put it that way, and that's how they're consuming music. And you know what? The curmudgeon in me says that's not how we should listen to music. But ultimately, if I'm an artist, if you want to listen to my music in a playlist and you only care about 4 songs on the 12 songs out of the 12 songs that I made on an album, that's fine. I mean, I'd rather you listen to my music than not listen to my music. So ultimately, I think, and again, this goes back to on-demand video. It's the convenience of it. It's I want to watch when I want to watch on my own time, right? On my own schedule. And it's the same with me. It's the same with streaming music now. I think that's why a lot of people don't listen to streaming or listen to music on the radio anymore, because it's just not part of our culture anymore. Obviously, radio's still valid. I'm not saying that, and I don't mean to diminish the people that work at radio stations and try to offer a very valuable service, because clearly it is. But the reality is that, and we all know it, that those numbers are shrinking, and maybe talk radio is taking over. But I don't know if really a lot of people are getting their music from radio anymore. What do you think, Mitch?
No, I think you're spot on. I think that's exactly what's happening, is that the dynamics and the way people get exposed to new artists and new cultures is not through radio. Radio isn't the distributor. It's probably why classic rock and classic hits, oldies, whatever you want to call them. By the way, the new oldies are the 80s, not the 60s, and people don't listen to the 50s anymore for oldies. It's just ancient music. But that's why you would probably a song that you grew up with, maybe that's 10, 20 years old, gives you a nice little warm, fuzzy feeling, because now you're experiencing, oh, yeah, I remember that song. Yeah,
Right.
I was going to the drive-in theater at that time, and it was fun. And I used to eat sundaes at the soda jerk at the local drugstore. That was just bringing back memories. So I think it's very valid for that. But today, your exposure to these things come from all kinds of different. I think it all changed with MTV. I think that was a pivotal point in the music, is that when MTV popped onto the scene in I guess that would be the mid 80s.
Yeah, that
when
was
they
certainly
came
the
out.
catalyst, because that changed a lot of things for sure.
Yeah, they changed things, and it was all based. They couldn't play an album. Well, they could, but they weren't. They were basing it on a single, and they had to have a visual component. So all of a sudden, if you had a hit song and you were an artist to be contended with, you had to have a video to go with it, a music video, and they weren't cheap to put together. But in addition to going to the studio to record, you also had to go to a production company and have a video done. Some better than others, some funny, some not so funny, some horrible, some great, and Land of Confusion kind of grabs my attention from Genesis with the puppets, with Reagan. And
Yeah.
I mean, there were just all kinds of things. And of course, there was all kinds of misogynistic visual elements that ZZ Top did, and maybe other groups. It was a transitional time where singles became more and more popular, and that probably became part of the catalyst for listening to singles on your iPod or your Walkman. Cassettes did that for you, because you could make mixtapes. You didn't generally transfer your whole album to a cassette. You would make a mixtape.
That is
and you would
very
use it for
true.
driving. So
Yeah, when I was a
cassettes-
kid, I made mixtapes all the time, and then when tapes went away, I was doing the same damn thing with CDs. So, but I still loved albums, but I absolutely was guilty of that as well. Mitch, actually, just a quick question from Robert Shoji in the chat here. He's asking, do you know anything about KHJ AM in Los Angeles during the 60s and 70s?
Oh, yeah, definitely. In fact, I almost had a job there. When I was in between jobs and I was trying to get a job in Philadelphia, I sent tapes to Rick Sklar at KHJ, which is the big top 40 Boss Radio. They were one of the originators of Boss Radio. It was a thing.
Can you
Everything was
explain
Boss
quickly
this,
what
Boss
that is? Because I don't remember.
What Boss Radio was?
Yeah, I've heard the term.
Well, it was top 40. It was heavy on personality. The people that were working there, I'm going to get their names all wrong, like Charlie Tuna, the real Don Steele. I mean, there was a lot of names. A lot of these people aren't around anymore that were really big personalities. Listen to the soundtrack of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Quentin Tarantino movie. It's almost completely KHJ and KMPC or whatever the stations were hot at the time. That was top. That was personality radio at its epitome. The guys were larger than life. They were working at big radio stations, and there might be only 2 or 3 of them that shared the entire audience for any new music that got played. And that was the way it was done. So KHJ, yeah, one of the original Boss radio stations. It was probably on a par with WFIL in Philadelphia, which is a station that I keep talking about because I had an association with them and I did nights. And I was right on the tail end of Boss Radio when it was really popular. But KHJ, yeah, a lot of respect for him. I didn't go to L.A. because I was concerned at my young age. When I was at FIL, I was like 20 years old. I was very concerned about whether or not I could survive in that environment. This is L.A. in the 70s. You know, there was a lot of stuff vying for your attention, and I probably would have been. I was very green. I was not a streetwise kid. Anybody who worked with me back in the day will say, yeah, he wasn't. He was very green, and I don't think I would have fit in. So I didn't go out there because it was maybe a very good decision. Maybe it was a really bad decision because I could have ended up hosting American Top 40 with Casey Kasem or doing a game show. A lot of those radio guys that were on the radio in L.A. also, you know, even if they were doing all nights, like Bob Eubanks did all nights on, I think, KMPC. And he ended up, you know, getting all the Chuck Barris shows, the Dating Game, and not the Dating Game. He was on Newlywed Show, things like that. So that was a cool time to be a radio disc jockey. It was a larger-than-life personality.
Mitch,
I hope
just
that answered your question, Robert.
Yeah, and thanks for Robert for the question. And wanted to bring in another question here from Laura Thompson as well, saying, Mitch, did you ever get a chance to meet or do you know Larry? Am I going to say this right? Lanny Frater. Am I saying that right?
No.
Does that sound right?
No, I don't know. Most of the guys I knew were in the similar station formats. There were a lot of very high-profile personalities that worked at other formats, you know, like Murray the K. I guess he worked at a tiny little radio station in Washington, ended up in New York. A lot of these guys aren't around anymore. I mean, I was very young in those days of radio, so I was sort of green to the whole thing. But a lot of the older guys sort of took me under their wing. I remember Bob Wood, they called him the Vanilla Gorilla, worked with me at KONO in San Antonio. And he was doing nights and I was doing afternoons. I was 18 years old and Bob was probably in his late 30s, 40-something. And he was completely wiped out. He was a example of why I wouldn't want to move to L.A. He was the nicest guy in the world. But he was just talking to me like, what's going on? What are you doing? Let's go to the drive-in, get a hamburger or something, middle of the night. And he liked the weed, so that was Bob. But that, you know, it was a whole different world back in those days. And I think that it probably was good that I didn't get sucked into it. Maybe I would have had the opportunity to do better, but it didn't work out that way. When I left FIL, I got out of the business for a while, and that might have been a good thing for me. It's not necessarily a good thing for everybody, but a lot of those people and a lot of the people that were part of that infrastructure I was talking about earlier with the music, and a lot of those guys are gone. I mean, they had to find another job, and I don't think a lot of them are fitting into today's infrastructure, and that's also why we're doing this show. I stick out like a sore thumb as the last angry DJ because I'm just not part of the today's world of broadcasting. You're far
seems
more
like
than I am.
We're a
but-
weird pairing, the two of us, because of the age gap between the two
Viva
of
la
us.
difference! Come on,
It's great.
enjoy
I love it. I love it. Oh, you're right.
I mean, we have
I think a
mutual
lot
respect.
of there are still people that are in the industry that are that have been working since that I listened to since I was a kid. But I think you're right. I think a lot of those personalities too from that era, well, they're probably retired by now, or probably
They're
by
dead.
choice.
They're gone, man.
Well,
They've
yeah,
moved
yeah, yeah.
on.
Well, but you know what? Even a lot of the people that I used to listen to are they're not really. I don't know where those people are now. I don't know what they're doing, if they're still working in radio, right? So it goes back to something we've talked about as a recurring theme on this show. Where are those quote unquote personalities, those great voices, those entertaining, those people that can make you laugh? And there's not a lot of excitement for me on the radio anymore. I don't really hear a lot of excitement on CFox, which is a big station. It's, a hugely successful station. I just don't really hear it.
Well, the problem is the big companies, and there's like 4 of them for whole North America. The top 4 companies own about 80%, 90% of the radio stations. They're making decisions about how they run their businesses by the bottom line. These aren't people that are in it for the bragging rights or the quality of broadcasting or the personalities that you talk about. They want inexpensive, interchangeable talent that they can bring in, and maybe with automation coming in with AI, they're like, wow, this is great. Now we don't have to pay our people talent. So the problem with being a personality that got ratings, which I had the opportunity to do, is that you stick out like a sore thumb when somebody's going over the bottom line and trying to figure out who gets to stay and who do we have to fire to lay off. I think Beasley just laid off a bunch of their staff in Philadelphia, and I think that just shows you that they're making decisions to the bottom line. So there's no room for expensive, high maintenance personalities. So that's the reason why it's going that way. And I'm not sure people understand or even want it. If there was a demand for it, it might come back. I know that there are opportunities that pop up from time to time on Sirius XM where they have somebody in there cultivate a playlist or a decade like the 70s or the 60s. And there's some older guys that I know, like David Heffel, doing the 60s. These are guys that were big in the day that are curating those formats on those stations. I'd love to do that, by the way.
Right.
I noticed that there's an opening in the 70s. So, whoever the decision makers are at Sirius, I'd love to have them on, by the way, the people at Sirius on, so I can say, see, I'm not so bad. I'm 70 and I'm perfect for the 70s. And I was there back when it was a thing.
Robert Shoji's just in the chat asking, does Top 40 radio exist today? And if so, who is listening? That's a great question. Do we know who is listening?
Yeah, it does. In Top 40 radio is what they call CHR now. It's contemporary hit radio. And what they're saying basically with that term is that only the cream of the crop that rises to the top, the stuff that everybody wants to hear, they're not going to limit it by the number of songs. It's kind of bad to have the term Top 40 because it's saying, well, we only have 40 songs. And people would say, 40? That's not enough. Maybe that's all they listen to, but they don't, you don't want to give away or limit what the experience might be. So saying it's contemporary hit radio, it's a nonsense term in a sense, but it's saying, hey, it could be, this is what the younger people want to hear. So part of the CHR audience, the people that are listening, are younger people. It used to be that we wanted teens. We wanted 12 plus people listening to our stations. Nowadays, it's probably more like 25 to 35, and they would have different formats that would reach different age strata out there. It's not it's not the same limitations. Back in the day, it was like top 40, MOR, middle of the road, AAA, which could be progressive, different format. There were only about 5 or 6 country, six or seven different formats that everything would break down into. Today, it's so fractured because the people's tastes are all over the place. So it's hard to put a name on it because it has such a narrow niche in terms of its market appeal as far as that goes. But yeah, today it's a whole different ballgame. And again, there's some still old guys like myself still floating around, but some of them have made their I guess mark doing something else that's related, and maybe it's a podcast. And some are embarrassing the hell out of themselves by being on the radio and trying to, it's I hate to pick on him because he's a nice guy, Cousin Brucey. Cousin Brucey talking like this, everybody, I'm your best pal. That was the style of radio back in the 60s. And Cousin still has a place. I think he's got a show on Sirius XM. More power to him. If there's people out there who want to hear Cousin Brucey, that's fine. Same thing with Casey Kasem. He's passed on, but his show lives on, and American Top 40 still gets played on some radio stations out there because that was the style. And he told interesting stories. So maybe there's something to that. Maybe what Casey did on American Top 40 is showing that there's a lot more to the music than just the hook in the song or the talking about the streak or other, novelty things. That was just kind of the way how it all worked. But tying into last week's conversation, it's very hard to lay out a format that everybody, when I say format, a curated playlist of songs that everybody's going to like. I don't think it exists anymore. I think it's very, very specific. And people tend to want to curate their own list, or they think they do, and they'd rather have their own choices. And that's what Apple Music does for you, or Spotify or Pandora. You're voting and deciding what songs get played. But it's kind of incestuous in a sense that you're picking all the music and doesn't allow the opportunity to be exposed to music that you wouldn't otherwise think of. So, how do you feel about that, Alex? Is that how do you get exposed to music that isn't normally in your wheelhouse and then get a surprise and say, wow, that artist is really awesome. I didn't even know they could do that stuff, and I really like it.
Yeah, I think word of mouth is pretty important. There's certainly a lot of bands I've been turned on to by other people, coworkers, friends, that kind of thing. I'd say the majority of music I discover is people telling me, "Oh, you got to check out that band." It's not just because I don't even use streaming services all that often. I mean, I do occasionally, but I'm still kind of I listen to what I like to listen to, and it's whatever is in my existing vinyl catalog. So for me to have to discover a new band, it's probably going to have to be somebody telling me you should listen to these people.
Would you listen to a country song?
Sure. I mean, I don't.
Would you go to like a jazz? I mean, how do you?
I listen. I just like good music. I like good music, so it doesn't.
That's a tough term. Good music. I remember my parents used to say, "We can't have any good music played here." It's a very subjective term.
Yeah, that there are songs in every genre that I like. So heavy metal, rock, pop, folk music, hip hop, country music. I mean, there's a lot of country music I don't like, but occasionally I'll find something that's like, oh, that's a good song. So I might not listen to country music a lot, but there are certain artists that I've been turned on to that I listen to.
Would you listen to like the Clash or the Boomtown Rats or any early
Clash
punk music?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I like all. Yeah. I like a lot of different stuff. I'd say my musical tastes are fairly eclectic. I mean, one just to give you an example. One moment I could be listening to Joan Baez, and the next thing I could be listening to Megadeth. So that's that. There's this giant spectrum. Yeah,
that's a stretch. It's very interesting you're talking about. First of all, I consider you to be knowledgeable of the music. I would say that I was not quite so knowledgeable, but I knew how to pick a hit, which had nothing to do with knowledge of music. Picking a hit, knowing how a hook works in a song, knowing what's going to get people's attention. But if you're a musician yourself, or you respect how they play, then that style or that skill can come from anywhere. It could come from any style of music, one way or the other. One of the craziest things that I used to get a lot when I was in high school and I was still on the radio, I worked in a top 40 station. The local big top 40 station was WAMS. And people would generally say, my fellow classmates would say, WAMS, that sucks. Oh, that top 40 music, it's horrible. Maybe you hate it. And I would say, well, what do you like? And they'd say, we like the progressive rock on WMMR during the Marconi experiment, or I like country and western. They would turn their nose up and say that the stations that were doing stuff that was cool were the let's say the college stations that were playing music that was fairly eclectic and across the board. It was sort of anti top 40 and anti-popular, and people really, really talked that up as being the coolest thing in the world. And I started scratching my head because I kind of had to ask the question, well, all these people are saying that they listen to the local college station, or they're listening to an alternative format. The reality is the ratings would show that those stations had a minuscule portion of the audience. Like in Philadelphia, in the heyday of radio when I was there, the WRTI, I think it was the jazz station. There were a couple of stations. They got talked up. They got rated very well by the guys in the papers. But they had a tiny, tiny fraction. And meanwhile, our top 40 stations were huge. We had 30, 40% of the listening audience listening to our stations. So how can so many people be bad-mouthing top 40 when most people were listening to it? Because top 40 was saying it's the 40 most popular songs of any format that's being played. It was just it had some kind of an attachment that people didn't like. They didn't like that commercialization of the music. So it was a very interesting phenomenon of how people responded to it. They used to hate the Jackson 5. People would come up to me and say, "You play Michael Jackson, that's it." And I would find out secretly that they loved the Jackson 5 because their music was good and they enjoyed it. Stevie Wonder the same way. Ever since Fingertips, or whatever his first song that he played at 17 years old, went on to be a big and well-accepted musician that got played on progressive and modern rock radio stations because he was being recognized for what he was. He was a great musician. He did what he did. So it's very interesting, the phenomenon of people's opinions and the politics that go into it. It's not a quantitative thing. You can't really stick your finger on it and be able to examine exactly why people like that particular song or that particular genre of music. And today it's horribly wrong because we're used to have, like, if you cut the music format into a pie, there might be 5, 6, 7, 8 slices to that pie. Today, there's an infinitesimal number of slices of music taste because everybody's taste can now be exactly what they want.
Yeah. Just bringing back Shoji Productions here in the chat, and this might be
Robert's
a big
paying
ask.
attention.
He's paying attention. This might be a big ask, Mitch, but can you give people a taste of how you would sound on the radio back then? Like, just from announcing songs to doing ads, like, what would you sound like?
Well, first of all, you asked for it. I didn't offer it. I might have done it a few times. It's not what you think. It's not the yucky radio voiced guy that you hear in the movies when you hear, "When I hear a DJ talking like this, hey everybody, it's 7:25." That's not the way I sounded when I was on the radio. But I did sound upbeat and over the top, and that was the style of the DJ genre. So if I were doing at WFIL, I might go 6:01 on 56 WFIL and $1 million weekend. Beautiful sunny day. We got some music coming up that's, it's kind of interesting. I've got a song done by an artist that has more curves than Wissahickon Drive. Here it comes, coming up next on 56. That's how a radio guy used to sound.
That's great.
It's a little bit
great.
of your voice above the sound in the room, a little over the top. But it wasn't this. It wasn't talking like, hey, scatter the wax and splatter the platters. Let's play something that was great back in the days. Here we go. You know, that to me is an insult to people in the broadcasting business because that's what everybody thinks of when they think, hey, old DJ. Listen to movies. They always have this guy on the desktop speaker in the room next to him on a radio or in a car. Even on that Hollywood Once Upon a Time in Hollywood Tarantino, you're hearing these guys a little over the top. And I say, well, I really wouldn't have done quite that. And the funny thing about that question, too, is that I was offered an opportunity to apply for a job where they wanted to recreate the sound of the 70s. And my question was, do you want me to sound like I did when I was on the air in the 70s, or do you want me to sound like I was on the air today? Because if I was on the air today, I would talk like I am right now. I would be conversational. I wouldn't be too over the top. I'm a little over the top just in conversation, but I'm not crazy over the top. So they said, no, we wanted to sound just like you did when you were on FIL. And I did a tape, and I'm like, I think I nailed that. I'm 70 years old. I nailed what I did when I was 20. It's kind of fun to be able to do that. So, yeah, Robert, thanks for the question. I hope I didn't embarrass anybody or turn anybody off, but I can do all those variations, but there's one I don't like. The yucker, we call it. El Yucker. In fact, I can probably hear Steve Stryker right now, one of our listeners and loyal followers. He does a great yucker voice. He and I were at a conversation the other day, and he used to drive the Q. He was the Q man in the Q van in Fort Myers, and he just dropped right into that character instantly when we were going back. Hey, now the Q man with the Q van is out on the roads of Fort Myers. What's happened on Route 41, Steve? And I can hear Steve right now going, hey, I'm behind a yellow Pontiac convertible, and if they pull over safely, I've got some cute Q stuff for them, and I might give them a Q-tip. You know, that's the way radio was done. When I was at FIO, we had the Prize Patrol and the Boss Chicks. You know, all this stuff would be canceled instantly, but by today's standards. We had girls running around in hot pants and T-shirts with suspenders on them. That was Boss Radio. That's what they did at KHJ. That's what they did at FIL. That's what they did at LS. All those big radio stations. It was a different time, a different place, and it was what it was. In fact, one of the first female radio DJs in Philadelphia, other than Anita, was Barbara Summers, who's now passed on. And Barbara worked at WFIL while I was there, and she did the all-night show. And the only thing I'd say about her being the first on a top 40 station was that she carried a little bit of a chip on her shoulder. Like, she was very sensitive to anything you would say that might, like any activist might be. And I'd say, hey, I'm not the guy you got to worry about. I'm all for you. Go for it. Any other interesting questions?
I think that just about does it. I really appreciate everybody chatting there. That's great. Thank you to Mark Giuliani, of course, and Robert Shoji for asking questions there. We got other people there too. Jerry Hoyle came in at the beginning, and Harshi Trivedi was in there as well. I don't know if he's still listening, but thank you to everybody for being here today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, Alex, while you're here, why don't you tell us, just because you went to all the trouble to find the gentleman. The gentleman's coming on next week as our guest.
Yes.
Should be a really fun show.
Absolutely, yeah. Please do stay, or not stay here for the entire week. Come back next Sunday, 2 p.m.
Just sit there and wait.
I want you to sit here and sit
Just
in your
sit there.
chair. Sit here and wait for the entire week until next Sunday. 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Next Sunday, episode 26, we have Michael Peterson, who is the corporate director of history at Shure Microphones. He's been working with the company since the tail end of the 70s, I think 75 or 76. He's seen many different regimes through that company, and he knows a lot. He's worked on many different teams, from product development to marketing, sales, and all that sort of stuff. And he now maintains the official Shure Museum, which is fantastic. And I'm not sure if it's open to the public or not. It may be. But we're going to talk to him about the history of microphones. It's impossible to cover the entire history over an hour, but we're going to do our best. We're going to try to consolidate things and give people. We'll talk a lot about Shure, obviously, but we're going to talk about a lot of the different types of microphones and how microphones were different 50, 60, 70 years ago versus today and what's changed. So if you're a microphone nerd, if you care about audio, if you're an audio nerd or you just want to learn more about it, please come back next Sunday.
Yeah, it's cool because there's one thing about radio guys and gals, for that matter. Did I say gals? Sorry about that. Radio women. I keep screwing up pronouns and things like that. I'm horrible with trying to. Anyhow, the tools of your trade, it was very very specific to what you were doing. Like in the day, we played turntables, so we know all the turntables that are great to play music on. What cartridge you should have on there. Should be a Stanton because it's got the stiff needle on it. It can take the cueing. All those little things. And the microphones, which were very prominent. And the microphones made a big difference on how you sounded and how you could play off of them and, do the Howard Stern close-up microphone effect. All of those things. So I'm looking forward to talking to Shure about that because those microphones had a prominent position in just about every radio station I ever worked at. It was like Shure, Electro Voice, maybe once in a while you'd see a Neumann or some other expensive brand, not on AM stations so much. Neumanns were on the FM side. So that should be a really interesting conversation because it's not talking about microphones, it's talking about your tools. It's like somebody coming on and say, I got a Les Paul Gibson guitar, some special item that you don't see that much anymore. And he's probably, if he was there in the 70s, he probably knew Mr. and Mrs. Shure personally back when they were around. So I'd love to hear some of the backstories of why they did that with that microphone or how come, because didn't they have like the first front addressed microphones? You know, there was a time where all microphones were side addressed.
We'll have to
they might have had the first. Yeah. It's going to be cool because a lot of history there. The SM50, 57, things like that. I mean, these were like groundbreaking changes in the way things were done.
Yeah,
so
57, 58s. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 57, 58. One with the wind filter on his windscreen, the other would not. So that's just part of it. And by the way, if you have suggestions, reach out to us. And we said earlier, I'm going to say it again, in order for us to be able to simulcast on all these different services and platforms, we need to have you, like on Facebook, follow us. We need to reach, 100 listeners to be able to get that?
Yeah, on Facebook, we need 100 followers.
Close.
I don't think that we have much of a platform there, but it would be good to get more people on there. We want to make this show available to everybody. So please do. And also just as a reminder too, if you want to support the show and the work that we do here, because we don't do ads, you can go to patreon.com/The Last Angry DJ, become a coffee supporter. I think it's a couple of bucks a month, $2 a month. And that will also, if you join our Discord community, which by the way, if you scan the QR code on the screen here, that will allow you to get into our community. And that is the best way to continue this conversation after the show. We can talk about what you like, what you don't like, maybe the type of guests that you want to see. And you know what? If you have suggestions for topics as well, please do let us know. That's the best way to get in touch with us. We also have an email address. If you go to thelastangrydj.com/contact, you can get in touch with us there. However you want to get in touch with us, we're available everywhere.
Yeah, and Alex just reached into his pocket and pulled out a Mac M2. That's not cheap to be able to do something like that. So I thank him for contributing that. But these things, it costs money to do this stuff. And any way you can help is appreciated. We're not specifically saying you have to give us money as a subscription goes. If you think we're over the top, then there's many ways you can give, and we appreciate it if you do that. But more than anything else, we want to know that we're appreciated, because there's a lot of effort that goes into putting these programs together. And I'm excited about it because I get to talk about stuff that I haven't talked about in years. I don't think I've uttered the word payola in decades. So maybe some people were interested in what I was talking about in that particular area. And maybe the statute of limitations have run out for some people. So I don't know if we can get in trouble on these. I guess you could. You could get in trouble about uttering some story that gets somebody into trouble. But fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of those people are dead now. They're not around. So there's nothing that can be done about it. So, yeah, it's kind of gallows humor. So, Alex, once again, thanks for being here. Thanks, folks, for listening in on what we're doing here. Did our audio just drop out for a second there? Look, I'm looking at the information. Well, anyhow, we'll see if we can iron out any of those technical glitches, including my sync, which may be in or out. We thank you very much for being here, Alex. Anything else that you want to talk to folks about?
No, that's it. Thanks, of course, to everybody in the chat for participating. We love seeing you here. We love the live comments. Please keep them coming. And I guess that's it. We'll see you next week with Michael Peterson from Sure, of course.
Look forward to it. Thanks. In the meantime, be safe, take care of yourself, and we'll see you on the other side.